Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up. Our first guests are Dr. Ron and Dr. Mary Hulnick, and they're here today to talk to us about their new book, Remembering the Light Within. Now, Doctors Ron and Mary are pioneers and worldwide leaders in the field of spiritual psychology, as well as teachers and facilitators of awakening in consciousness. So let's welcome to the show Dr. Ron and Dr. Mary.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yes, it's wonderful to be with you.
Oh, my goodness, it's such a pleasure to have you both here, and what an inspirational book, my goodness. It just is bringing people, this is kind of a little bit of a pun, but from the Stone Age in some ways. They're kind of bringing us into the light. Oh, my goodness.
That analogy is really very accurate.
Well, it's interesting because sometimes it could feel like spiritually we're kind of still stuck back there,
Yes. A bit of the Neanderthal. Yeah. But the great thing is that there are so many ways that people can remember the light within, that they can awaken, and so many of them are simple and things that people can do in their everyday lives. And that's part of how we designed this book, is to make the information very accessible and practical.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know that you both wrote this book. It's really about people waking up. So why do you think that we need, especially, your book, now more than ever before?
Well, from our perspective, and, we've been at this now for about 37 years, so we've seen some very definite trends. But from our perspective, the main reason is because in our educational system and the way that we are brought up, we are not really taught to look at things from a spiritual perspective. We are taught to look at things from what we might call a belief system perspective, and it largely comes down through religions. And most religions, strangely enough, all say the same thing, which we are in total agreement with, and that is that the thing we're all going for is to have more love in our lives. So how do you do that? And our perspective is that let's forget about all the rest. Let's forget about what food we eat, what we wear, what holidays we celebrate, when we worship. Let's put all that aside and focus on how can we be more loving within ourselves and with other people. And that is the total thrust of what our work is all about and has been for all this time.
And we invite people into the spiritual context. We say, consider the possibility that rather than a human being with a soul, that you're a divine being having and using a human experience for the purpose of awakening, and that the reason that you're here is to wake up and remember who you are. And that once somebody catches on to that idea, if it has resonance inside of them, it is a game changer. It changes everything, because you start to look through different eyes. You begin to see life through soul-centered eyes. You see life as opportunity for issue resolution, opportunity to be of service to other people, opportunity to really remember your essential nature and become the presence of love and live that as a reality rather than a concept in your everyday life.
Another thing that it's important to keep in mind, which we keep reminding people of, the word to know, knowledge, really comes from the Greek gnosis, which had two meanings at that time. We have chosen one meaning to focus on, and that is to know about. So it's an intellectual pursuit, and we learn concepts, and we learn something, and then we say, well, we know that. But the other meaning was really the more important meaning, and that was to know through experience. And it's one thing to know about something. It's quite another thing to know that same thing because you have actually experienced it. So at USM, at the University of Santa Monica, where we've been doing these programs for the last 36 or so years, the programs are highly experiential, so that when we talk about something, people go into a process that we work with that has many variations, where they have the experience of the thing we're talking about. So it's one thing to espouse love. It's quite another thing when you have the experience to step into that place within you where you live in your own loving, and then you go, oh my God, I had no idea this was even available to me. That's a game changer. We see it a lot.
You know, that perspective really is, because a lot of people walk around and they're stuck in, you know, what's in it for me and in this human physical experience. And to move beyond this, to look at the spiritual experience, you know, we're, a divine being, here having a human experience, it puts it into a different perspective when they look at life. And I loved how you talked about that, Dr. Mary and Dr. Ron. It really changes everything.
It does. It changes everything. And one thing we like to share with people, if they want the experience of what we're talking about, pick a day, pick the rest of today, pick tomorrow. But from the time you get up in the morning, your one goal for the day, everywhere you go, everyone you meet, no matter where you are, you choose to see that person as a loving being who is using this human experience for purpose of awakening. So, wow, there's a person in the checkout counter at the grocery store. They're a divine being who's having a human experience of checking out their groceries at this period of time. There's a whole bunch of people on the freeway driving their cars. All of them, they're divine beings who really don't know it, but I know it, and so I'm going to see them that way. You spend a whole day like that, it will change your life.
And part of what we talk about is really the distinction between seeing with the eyes of the ego and seeing with soul-centered eyes. Ego-centered eyes, ego-focused eyes tend to be judgmental. They tend to be caught in the duality. They tend to see things as right or wrong, good or bad, whereas soul-centered eyes are eyes that see with acceptance, with compassion. They're softer eyes. They're a recognition that we all are human. We all have spiritual curriculum, if you will. We have issues that we come to heal. We have challenges that we encounter in our human lives that are very difficult and very disturbing, and that there is an opportunity for deep, deep healing and resolution of these issues, which is the process then of dissolving the barriers that block us from the awareness of our essential nature, which is loving and wise, joyful and creative, really entering the spiritual context and learning how to use these simple principles and practices that are radical in that they are so profoundly life-changing is a tremendous game changer for people. It is so empowering and gives so much leverage, because when we're caught in the five-sense reality of the ego, it's very easy to feel at the effect of everything, to feel victimized by life itself, let alone the other people, to say nothing of the families that we came into.
Here's another way of looking at it that people have very often a realization of, oh my God, that's right. Mm-hmm. If we see something outside that's going on outside, we immediately will tend to go into what Mary was talking about as the good or bad. And let's say it's something that we determine as bad. So since feelings are a direct result of thoughts, if I see something that I make bad, I am going to have automatically negative feelings about it. And I will say I am upset because, and I will blame it on the thing that's going out going on outside there. And people just simply assume that that is the way that it is. But it isn't that way unless we choose to make it that way. Because the reality is that the experience that you're having is going on inside of you. It's not going on out there. Whatever is going on out there is what's going on out there. The experience you're having is inside of you. And that experience is directly related to how you interpret that experience that's happening out there. If it's something that you judge as good, you're going to feel happy. If it's something you judge as bad, you're going to feel disturbed. But in either case, you're going to attempt to do work out there to try to change the situation, which you then assume is going to change your experience of it. But your experience of it is not happening out there. It's happening inside of you. So we focus on, are there things that you can do, are there processes you can engage in where you actually change the experience that you have inside of you by changing your interpretation of what's going on out there in the world. So we start to realize that we really do have dominion over what goes on inside of us, just that nobody ever told us that before, and so much less shown us how to do it. And that's what spirituality is all about at University of Santa Monica.
You know, the people of Santa Monica are so lucky to have you guys right there. And I'm sure you get people from all over the world that travel to
We do.
We have been very blessed to have people come from across the country and around the world, and so we really have an international community, and it's been a great blessing and continues to be so.
Yeah, I can easily see that. You know, and it's interesting as we walk through life. It seems a lot of times we're just managing our misperceptions, you know, of things that we're, like how you both were discussing, are dubbing right or wrong or good or bad or what have you, and instead of being in that really kind of heart-centered place where we're more looking at life, you know, instead of having these predetermined judgments on certain things or what have you. It's just really interesting.
The irony is that people don't realize this. We can say that we are for something that we perceive as very positive. Like a lot of this is, we're seeing it in the political arena right now.
Mm-hmm.
But what people don't realize, they don't understand, if you go out and you march with againstness, I'm against this, I'm against that, or if you enter into dialogue and you try to shut out the other person from giving their perspective, what people don't realize is that when they do things like that, they are really only adding to the sum total of the againstness that is present in the world. They're actually supporting the very thing that they say they are against. And that seems to be a huge misunderstanding that's going on this planet at that time, and very much so in this country.
You know, another thing, Marianne, that we really emphasize to people is that issues are opportunities. And so that is a radical reframe for many people, that the very challenges that they are experiencing in their lives and inside themselves, the things that are their chronic, I'm upset because, this really are material that can be used not only in service to their deep healing, but also in service to their liberation into the revelation of their authentic self. Everybody has an authentic self, and as we heal these issues and we wake up, the authentic self comes forward in all its glory. And that is part of the joy and blessing of our work, to be involved in a community of thousands of people who have been doing this work over the years and witnessing not only the transformation in their consciousness, but also the transformation in their lives. And we just are very, very grateful.
Yeah, it's so easy to see when you make these shifts, and your book is, the book that you both wrote is just outstanding. It's so well laid out. It gives people a path that they can go ahead and follow to make these changes in their life and really look at life in a more profound way.
Yes, in a way that one can experience deep meaning and greater awareness of the sacred, which is so important in this time when there are so many distractions that can pull us away from our own hearts, from our own deepening awareness of the real purpose of life.
Another thing about this particular book, which I have to admit is largely Mary's creation, but it's designed in 26 chapters, and our highest recommendation is that people, see, rather than just read a chapter and say, got that, on to the next one, read the chapter, practice what's in there for 2 weeks, and then go on to the next chapter. The book has 26 chapters, so if one does it that way, it becomes a year-long experiential course, and it's very effective that way.
And it's the kind of thing that a person could get together, a group of their like-minded friends, and they could have, let's just call it a study group or a book club where they met once every 2 weeks. And it wouldn't have to be a long meeting. It might be 90 minutes or 2 hours, depending on how many people were involved. But it would be a way that they could support each other. They could share their experiences of working with the material and the progression and growth that people would experience over time would be a very beautiful thing. We know one of our graduates who is well familiar with our work. When the book came out, she was part of a spiritual study group that had been meeting for some time. And she said to them, why don't we change things up a bit? Let's use this book as a course for a year. And they've been doing that with beautiful results.
And such a beautiful thing to share with other people, and it's so true. I mean, you don't really understand information, I believe, most of the time, unless you've not only retained it, been able to teach it as well and to live it.
That's right.
That's it.
Absolutely true.
Yes, it's one thing to talk the talk. It's another thing to walk the walk, to really work with these things so that we're utilizing them every day. And that's part of what we find so wonderful about this work, is that it is practical, it is doable, it provides keys and tools that you can use in your everyday life.
Yeah, it really gives people a starting point to make just really profound. And I know I keep using that word, but it fits for the work that you guys do. It's a profound change in their lives because it's so different from moving from a place where, you view yourself as a victim in life to where you're making changes as a divine being. Yes.
There are so many beautiful stories we could share of people who have just made radical shifts in their lives as a result of this, but done it in a very conscious way, not in a precipitous way, but more consciously. Because as the unresolved issues began to heal and fall away, it's like the calling of their heart is so much more accessible. They can hear it and respond to it and begin to take steps to move in the direction of what provides much greater meaning and fulfillment, whether it be in their relationships, their career paths. People find very often that their partnerships, their marriages, their relationships with their children, with their family of origin are just radically transformed from things that were contentious and distant to deep healing and a much more profound level of acceptance, of understanding, and of, let's just call it, conversation of the heart. a lot of forgiveness.
Well, and I know in your book you both discuss deep listening and prayers and how that impacts our life. Can you expand on that for us a little?
Well, we encourage people in a practice of heart-centered listening, of really listening with the ears of your heart, of slowing down, of really coming present, of really being with someone else and listening not only to the content of what they share, but more importantly to the deeper message within what they're sharing, and also listening to the person themselves. When people feel heard, they feel loved, which is just an extraordinary gift. I think we did a survey of our students at one point to ask them what their most common upset was, and it was that they felt that they weren't listened to, that people didn't really hear them. And so this deep listening, heart-centered listening, is one of the very first things that we teach people, because we are going to be embarking upon a process over time that will involve listening from our hearts and being with each other in a loving, supportive, compassionate, and kind way. And part of what this kind of listening does is it also assists us in listening more deeply inside ourselves, to hear the calling of our heart, to hear spiritual guidance, to recognize that there's a different operating system when you move into the spiritual context. And as a result of that, this different operating system provides guidance, it provides inspiration, it what can I say? It's like rather than having a judge inside your head, you have a wise counselor, a friend.
The other thing about what Mary is talking about, deep listening, most of the time when we're listening, at least I know I went through this for years, I was much more interested in what I was going to be then sharing. And at some point, I realized that I already pretty much knew everything I had to say. But I had the possibility of learning something new by listening to what somebody else had to say. And at that point on, conversations took on a much different and a much deeper meaning. They became much more interesting. And this is very hard because I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of David Hawkins, but he made it very clear in his work, and that I think it was something like about 80% of the world's population. When I read this, I thought, wow, that's amazing. But 80% of the world's population cannot comprehend that someone else can have an opinion about something that's different from their opinion, and maybe that both opinions could be accurate. That, to me, is an astonishing figure and explains so much of why we have much of the contention we have on the planet at this time.
That sure does describe a lot of what's going on.
Yeah.
You look at just how strained relationships are now, and it feels like it's more tense now than it's been in many years. But just how strained, yeah, and it's that.
From our perspective, that's not necessarily a bad thing. For this reason, along with the spiritual perspective comes an awareness of the evolution of humanity, that in reality, this is the most peaceful time per capita that has ever existed on the planet at that time, believe it or not. But what's happening right now is that so much negativity and consternation is coming up to the surface. So from our perspective, it's not necessarily bad because it gives us an opportunity to work on it and clear it out so that we can go forward. I think a good example of that is all of this stuff that's going on right now about sexual harassment. It's been going on for some time, but now it's all coming forward so that it can be brought into everybody's awareness, and we can all learn to have a greater level of respect for each other. So we always look at the positive side of things. What can we gain from this? What can we learn from this? How can we use this to assist ourselves and everyone in having a more fulfilling life?
You know, I think Dr. Mary put it so well at the beginning of the show here is issues are opportunities. And
right.
When you look at things like that, it's like, you know, and I've jotted that down because that is such a profound statement. I mean, because they are opportunities regardless of what's going on around you. You have to look for that ray of sunshine going, what am I supposed to learn here? What am I supposed to get?
Yes. It changes everything because absent of that approach, really we are stuck in victim consciousness. And one of my favorite quotes is really from George Bernard Shaw, you know, that we were meant to be something beyond a little clod of ailments, complaining because the world doesn't make us happy. And there is empowerment in accepting responsibility and recognizing that we can make choices inwardly and outwardly that can transform a life from a painful, hurtful, chronic, I'm upset because kind of life, to a life of empowerment, a life of service, a life of deep healing and transformation. And so our message is one of there is a path of grace that is available to each of us, and in this season of the heart that we are entering at this time, it's such a beautiful opportunity because very often I think this season of the year is a beautiful opportunity for a deeper conversation inside ourselves in terms of what is real, and what is it that provides meaning and fulfillment. There is so much to distract us, and to slow down and take a little time for that inner conversation about who am I and what is the purpose of my life and how can I make a meaningful contribution. And perhaps the most meaningful contribution that we can make to ourselves is remembering who we really are and engaging in the practices that are designed to support us in doing that.
Oh, that's so beautifully said, especially because, you know, most people have a story going on in their life that they keep replaying, and you touch on this in your book about unworthiness. And almost everyone I know has that to one degree or another, just based on either their upbringing or people they've been around or teachers that they've had. And to live a life that, you know, you're fully within your power, you're not a victim, and you're worthy, really moves you to a place of such great personal empowerment.
Exactly.
That's exactly accurate. and you know, in this time, authentic empowerment, I think, is it's part of the conversation on the planet. And as Ron said, there's so many people that are finding the strength of heart. They're finding their authentic voice. They're standing up. They're speaking from their strength, and they're and yet there is so much available even beyond that.
Well, and you talked about this when we started chatting initially, about how people get stuck with their barriers. And I'm sure a lot of people, like, everyone's got their thing, whatever that is.
Yeah.
You know, it's a recurring issue, shows up one way or another. It could be bad relationship, finances, weight, but whatever that thing is. And so for people to be able to have something like your book where it helps move them forward, I mean, you don't want to give everything away because I think people should get their own copy of Remembering the Light Within. But if you can touch on that a little bit, that would be fabulous.
Well, what you're saying is very true, and the biggest obstacle that we find with people, which is why we have a program that goes on over time and why we suggest people work with the book for a year, is that it's like it really is retraining ourselves to think in a different way so that we can begin to see what is true or what is real and what is make-believe. So doing the work, there is no substitute for doing the work over time. I mean, unless you're going to wait for the bolt of lightning to come out of the sky to awaken you, which happens every now and then, but I'd rather do the work, and then if I get the bolt, that'll be great. But I'm working on it anyway. You know?
I would say that perhaps one of the biggest keys is recognizing the addiction of the ego mind to judgment, and that when we're in judgment and seeing through those harsh eyes of the ego that are caught in the duality, that is a recipe for unhappiness. Because really every judgment we place against someone else, we are actually placing it against ourselves as well. And what those judgments do is they create a very painful inner experience of a separation from our heart, separation from the authenticity of who we are. And so the practice of compassion, of compassionate self-forgiveness for judgments, of learning to let go of our judgments is the beginning of a profoundly healing process, not only of the mind, but of the emotions. One of the principles of spiritual psychology is how you relate to the issue is the issue. And so how we relate with ourselves when we're upset, when we're disturbed, if we can have compassion for ourselves, if we can recognize that we're in a field of opportunity for healing, opportunity for learning, opportunity for awakening. And this is the words are easy to say, but strengthening the muscle in consciousness that allows us in the moment to say, I'm upset. This is feedback from inside myself that there's opportunity present for my healing. And Marianne, we certainly don't mean that there aren't outer circumstances that also need to be addressed. There are, but we need to learn to walk with both our right and left feet. We need to do the inner work, and then we are going to be much more clear and conscious and able to deal with some of the challenging external situations and relationships and communications that we encounter in our everyday life.
Yeah, it just puts us in a place where we're able to meet life and be there and just be mindful and present, as opposed to being just reactive to things that are any stimulus that comes our way.
That is the name of the game.
Oh, well, Dr. Mary and Dr. Ron, where can people connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your great book and all the work you're doing? Yes,
our website is www.universityofsantamonica.edu, and we have a beautiful website. It's a wonderful place for people to learn more. There are quite a few videos on YouTube that people can also watch that share some of the basic principles and some examples of our work with people. Our book, Remembering the Light Within, is available on Amazon. That's probably one of the easiest ways for people to get it.
Well, Dr. Mary and Dr. Ron, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
really a pleasure to be with you. What a wonderful service you are providing to people, Marianne, and just a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
We'll have to do it again soon.
We'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
Do you know that you can become a genius at any age? Do you know that you can change your life and create a brilliant life for yourself? Hi, I am Olympia LaPointe, an award-winning rocket scientist who you more than likely have seen on TED Talks, Impact Theory, and PBS. Check out my latest book, Answers Unleashed, The Science of Unleashing Your Brain's Power. Simply go to AnswersUnleashed.com books and check it out for yourself. You'll find the tools to help you create the life you've always wanted.
The highly acclaimed and newly released book, The Hand Part 2 by Lynn Van Praagh Grattan, describes the journey between a psychic medium and a family who lost a son. Messages from Beyond Eternity's Gate is of love and healing. For more information, visit www.lynnvanpraagh-grattan.com. That's www.lynnvanpraagh-grattan.com.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. My goodness, weren't the Hulnicks very inspirational? Just love that discussion we had with them. Our next guest is here today to talk to us about her new book, Wordstruck. So Susanna Janssen is a foreign language educator, author, speaker, and newspaper columnist. Susanna writes with heart and humor on all topics related to words, language, culture, and travel. So let's welcome to the show, Susanna.
Thank you very much, Marianne.
What a joy it is to have you here. And I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
Wow, now that's a lifelong question, but I've always been involved and fascinated by words and language and cultures. And I grew up in a multicultural household. My mother, her first language was Italian, and my father's first language was Dutch. He was from the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. And I didn't learn either of those languages from my parents, but I studied Spanish all through school. I got my graduate degrees in Spanish and taught foreign language, have been teaching foreign language for decades. And I just had all these ideas of things I wanted to write about. And, you know, I was not going to make any one of these topics into a whole book. In other words, I wasn't going to write a whole book about, you know, the difficulties of learning English or Shakespeare or about Cockney slang. But I wanted to research these things that were interesting to me about languages and cultures and words. And that's kind of how my book came about, because I was given the opportunity to write a newspaper column and on words, language, and cultures. And, of course, I jumped at that. And I realized then that what I was actually writing was chapters of a book, because I would research my topic and write the piece and publish it. And then people would say, oh, gee, couldn't you send me that piece that you wrote about goodbye and hello being really controversial words, or the inconstant consonants and sudden vowel movements that make English so hard to learn for foreigners, or about the crazy festivals in the month of May around the world. And so I thought, I really do want to pull all this stuff together and make it into a book. That's what I did.
Oh, you've done a phenomenal job. It's an amazing book and such a great read, and there's so much humor in it, my goodness. And I learned so much going through the book. And you touched on one thing that I'd love for you to share with us is about, hello and goodbye. So what's that all about?
Well, that is really an interesting saga. We just take those words so for granted. And how many times in the day do we use hello and goodbye? And it turns out that they were both at one time, at different times, they were both very controversial words. And goodbye we can start out with, because goodbye was originally God be with ye, God be with ye, Y-E, God be with ye. And, in the 15th century, people said all of those words as a greeting or as a goodbye. But then as time went on, it kind of got mashed together, and I don't even know how it was pronounced, but I'll say kind of this jumble. It sort of turned into something that must have been like Gabri. And already people were familiar with phrases like good evening and good day, and so goodbye morphed easily out of what was originally the God be with you. But it didn't sit well with a lot of people. It just seemed like sort of a degenerate thing to say, degenerating the original phrase. So it really took some time to catch on. And we don't realize it has that controversial background.
Yeah, it's interesting when you kind of dive into some of these words and their origin, just how little of them have an origin, obviously, here in the U.S., but I mean, it just is kind of, it's got this fun kind of crazy mix to it all.
Boy, that is the truth. Yeah. Do you want me to say a few things about hello?
Oh, yes, please. We haven't even touched that.
We didn't touch hello yet, and we can't imagine answering the phone any other really standard way than hello, that being our formula. But I had remembered reading long ago how it actually was a chosen word. It was a word that was decided that would be our greeting. And when I researched that, it turns out that Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Alva Edison were coming up with all these inventions at the same time. They were born in the same year. So they were inventing, metal detectors and telegraph and telephone and phonograph and motion picture camera. And when Alexander Graham Bell, who's credited with inventing the telephone, he felt that our way of answering the phone should be ahoy. And he actually stuck by that all his life. And let me explain that, the original telephone was open on both ends at all times. And it was used only for business communication. So if I was in one office and you were in the other office, I would have to be able to say something that would call your attention very firmly, very clearly to get you to come to the phone. And Alexander Graham Bell said that should be ahoy. But Thomas Edison favored another word, and that was hello. But hello up until that time was kind of a word not as a greeting. It wasn't used as a greeting. It was used to get someone's attention, as in you're hailing a ferry boat, for example. Or, hello, did you see what you just spilled on my shoes? And, but it was an actual decision. And in the first phone book that was printed, people were, it was recommended to users that they use the word hello to answer the phone. And we've been doing that ever since, although Alexander Graham Bell used ahoy for the rest of his life.
I think most people would feel just shocked knowing that this was more of a trained response that's happened over years, as opposed to, having a more of a different origin as a greeting.
Yes, exactly. We can't imagine it was anything but a greeting, but it didn't really become a greeting until it became the way to answer the telephone, because up until then, it wasn't really appropriate, at least in society. It was not appropriate to greet someone unless you had been introduced to them already.
Yeah.
And so with the use of the word hello and the invention of the telephone, suddenly things started to become a little bit more informal, and people loosened up to where they finally felt it was okay to say hello before they'd actually been introduced formally.
Now, I know, my goodness, you've done so much research over the years. What is, I'm sure there's many things. It'd be like trying to choose a favorite child, but what is something that has really stuck out as just one of your favorite pieces of discovery as you went along?
Well, I sure did discover a lot about, how many?
I know it's kind of like a very open question with all the work that you've done in this field. My goodness, but it's just so fascinating. We couldn't cover it all today, and of course we want people to go pick up their own copy of Wordstruck, but I figured if you could share one of your favorites with us, that'd be kind of fun.
Well, one thing that I found in my research is that I discovered so much humor in words, in word derivations, in foreign words, in malapropisms, people using words the wrong way, humor in the way English is translated in foreign countries, in menus, for example, for the English-speaking tourists, or in signs, for example. There's so much humor, really hilarity in all of this. Yeah. But I would have to say that I just became, and I still am endlessly fascinated with foreign words. Because foreign words, and actually foreign proverbs as well, proverbs in Spanish, proverbs in Italian, in German, they're so similar to our English. And so I ended up writing very extensively about foreign words, for example, the words that we have no translation for in English, and also really digging into proverbs, particularly in Spanish, because, I'm fluent in Spanish. I taught Spanish for decades. And, just presenting the similarity of those things. I'll give you an example. We say to jump from the frying pan into the fire, and in Spanish they say something so similar. They just say to go from the pan into the coals. So that's very, very similar. But oftentimes we have the same concept, but our proverb or our expression uses completely different words. We will say it's a horse of a different color, to say it's something entirely different. And in Spanish you say it's grain from a different sack. Marianne, I'll tell you my very favorite. We say, if we're in a difficult spot, we'll say between a rock and a hard place. And this expression in Spanish came out of the Middle Ages, the swashbuckling Three Musketeer era, and they say to be between the sword and the wall.
Oh, that's a good one.
It is a good one. It's so colorful and creative.
Yeah, it really does paint that picture. It's so fun how language will have, just the translation differently.
Yes, and oftentimes we think we're communicating well as we're learning a second language, and we end up using a word that's either scandalous or terrible or just means something entirely different. The classic in Spanish is the word embarazada, which actually sounds a lot like embarrassed, doesn't it? Embarazada. And so students will pick up on that word and they'll start using it, but it means pregnant. Yes, and it's a classic false friend, as they call them, false friend. Tricks you into using it in a really wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an interesting thing to compare learning one language with learning another, or compare how the ease with which we speak English. We're just hardwired to speak English, having grown up with it, as anybody is in their native language. But I didn't really have to research this because I had been seeing this all my language life. And that is that, in English, we change the meaning of our verbs by changing out the preposition that follows the verb. And let me give you an example. A common verb like take. Take has so many meanings, it takes up columns in the dictionary because we have, for example, take in, take out, take off. See, I'm changing the preposition each time. Take over, take to, like someone takes to a particular kind of music or something like that. And in another language, for a person from another language, to learn how to do this in English is terribly difficult. My students in Spanish used to think, it's so hard to learn all these different words for take. Why don't they just use take and a preposition? That would be so much more difficult to learn because you would tend to get it wrong every time.
Yeah, there's so many different meanings that it would be kind of a little confusing. I think it would be a very difficult language to kind of grasp more than maybe some of the others. I mean, what's your experience been on that?
Well, my experience is that English is a quite difficult language to learn. It's not the most difficult. It's considered to be in the mid category because many other languages are considered, like Chinese and Japanese. The Asian languages would be considered more difficult to learn. Any language that doesn't use the Roman alphabet would be more difficult to learn, Arabic and so forth. But, there are certain things that make English somewhat easy to learn. And that, for example, our verbs, the way we structure our verbs, they don't change very much as we run through the persons. Because I say, I cook, you cook, he cooks, she cooks, changes a little bit there. We cook, y'all cook, and they cook. The only thing that changes is he and she. Changes to cooks. When we go into the past tense, it's all cooked. Everybody cooked. Really very simple compared to a language like, any language really, most languages where you have to conjugate the verb or change the forms of the verb to reflect who's doing it. So I have found, people say to me, I hear that Spanish is one of the easiest languages to learn. Generally, especially for Americans, most of us have not grown up listening to a lot of foreign language. Generally, any foreign language is going to be, somewhat difficult for us to learn. In my experience, Spanish has a few things that are easier about it than, say, French or Italian. But, it's a delightful language to learn, and it's a great one to start with. But I don't think any of us could say, that's an easy language to learn. Marianne, do you know any foreign language?
Well, I know a lot of Spanglish. I took I took Spanish for many years, and I just didn't really grab onto that like some of my friends did. So it was just not something that came very easily for me. And it probably may have been the time when I was growing up and just not as interested in that as I was in like cross country and other things, So it's really interesting, but it's funny when people speak it now. I mean, I understand it, and I understand mostly what they're saying. It takes me a while to figure out what to say back,
Sure. That's the productive part, whereas listening and understanding is the more receptive part, and that's going to come a little easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I know in your book, I mean, we're kind of switching topics a little bit, though. You talk about how you can spot a liar through the words they're using, and I think that's so important to talk about.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's a really hot topic, and I don't know, I just stumbled upon it because I was always interested in this. I spent some time looking at law enforcement material that was training personnel how to spot a liar by their body language. And I knew this to be true. I think we've all run across some of this, shifting eyes, shuffling feet, that kind of thing. But I thought, well, there must be a way to also notice things that people say. So I started in, I dug in on that research, and sure enough, there's quite a few things. And for starters, some of it is stalling tactics. And you ask a question and someone says, huh? Or what? Or they might even say, or they might repeat your question back at you. So you say, did you take a piece out of that pie that I baked? And they say, did I take a piece out of that pie that you baked? Kind of word. It's stalling tactics because they're trying to, mentally, and probably unconsciously, the person is mentally trying to compose something that you're going to find believable.
Mm-hmm. They're answering it with a question and coming back going, okay, what am I going to say next? And they're already trying to process what they're going to say. Exactly.
And then, many people, when they lie, and we all do a little bit of lying at some point in time, and usually these are, we tell lies out of kindliness or to make ourselves seem more able or whatever. But a person might start out with an assertion of truth. And so they'll say something like, this is the truth. This is the bottom line. You've got to believe me. I'm being perfectly honest, or to be perfectly honest with you. And it's not always an indication of a lie, of course not. We all have our patterns of speech. But there's just these things that make little red flags go up. And one of them, and this is a really big one, is when a person answers or makes a statement and they don't use the contractions that we so often use, like couldn't, wouldn't, didn't, hadn't, isn't, aren't. They don't say, I didn't do that. They say, I did not do that. And so it's really an assertion of truth, another way of asserting one's rightness by avoiding the contraction.
It's just so fascinating. I mean, you've made language fun. Your book was so fascinating because it had so many different pieces in it that had these like gems that are attached to it. Because most people, we've been through a couple things already. When they look at, things that would, and is not always the case, but, how to spot someone who's a liar and hello and goodbye and all these interesting things. I can see why you really have dived into this and why it's a passion of yours.
It is a passion of mine, and I have to say, I've always been kind of an eclectic person. I would say a dilettante, but an eclectic person. I just am interested in so many different things, and so it just seems logical that the book that I wrote is a book on 60 different topics around under the umbrella of words, language, and culture. And one thing people have told me, I've gotten so much feedback on my book. People say, oh, I just love the fact that your chapters are so short. Because, when I was writing the newspaper column, actually I still am, but my pieces were limited to a certain word count. And, I rewrote everything and edited and everything, but I kind of just stuck with the same length because, people's attention spans aren't what they used to be. And even I find myself preferring to read shorter, pithier pieces. Mm-hmm. And I've also discovered that many people who have read my book have said, I find myself now to be a better reader. Or they say, I never considered myself a very enthusiastic reader, but I had so much reading the book that now I'm reaching for something else that I might read that I'll find both interesting and informative. And it's so gratifying. That's so gratifying to me. And also to know that my book is being used in some classrooms as well.
Oh, I can easily see why. I'm sure the students that pick this up have just a blast because it makes language fun. For some people, language can be a fun thing. When I was in school and learning Spanish, I mean, it was not easy. So I struggled with that, and I think sometimes people go through that same struggle as well. So it's kind of nice to have this fun piece that talks about language, because then it can make it a little bit more interesting.
Well, yes, and I wrote about that struggle really at length, because after I had taken 8 years of Spanish, 4 years in high school and 4 years in college, I graduated from the university, and I was given honors by the Spanish department because I had straight A's. Mm-hmm. But and an invitation to the graduate program, but I couldn't speak Spanish because none of the methodology was conversational. It was all translation, and it was, listening, and it was writing, and it was conjugating verbs, but it wasn't conversational. I never had an actual conversation in Spanish. And so, to my horror, all my fellow graduate students were native speakers of Spanish, because we were getting a grad degree in literature and not in the Spanish language literature. And I went from the top of the heap to the bottom of the barrel. And it was 2 years in graduate school of being completely immersed with these fellow students from Latin America, day in and day out, 8 to 12 hours a day. That's what made me bilingual. And for me, the classes, the study in school, it was really a struggle. And, gee, I wonder sometimes why I persisted. I'm awfully glad that I did. But obviously, we know that many people don't. They either get bored or frustrated, or they just don't see that they have an immediate use or application for the study.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, because I could feel what you're talking about too. Yeah. It was interesting. I was in El Salvador many years ago, and I figured, I know, I could still remember more Spanish than I do now. I'm like, I could do this pretty well. Between the dialects and everything, it was very difficult communicating completely. Mm-hmm. And I realized how poorly I had equipped myself for that trip.
Well, being a second language speaker, for any of us at any point in our second language, it's always very humbling.
Yeah.
Don't you find that it's just humbling?
It is beyond humbling. Well, and you talk about a piece. I like to talk on, just kind of segue to this a little bit. You talk about how the Arabic language has really impacted the English language. And I'd love for you to share some of that with us, because I found that to be completely fascinating.
And was it surprising to you?
Very surprising. Very surprising. On some of it I kind of knew, but, a lot of it that you brought up, I had no idea.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really know the scope of it either, but I just knew from Spanish, all my years teaching Spanish, that there's several hundred Arabic words in the Spanish language, because the waves of Arab peoples came over the Straits of Gibraltar into Spain in the 8th century, the early 8th century, in 711 A.D., and they, to one degree or another, they controlled the Spanish and the peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula it's called, what's today Spain and Portugal, until 1492. In that auspicious year, 1492, was when the last of the Arabs were finally driven out. So needless to say, there was a huge influence on the Spanish language by the Arabic language, and a lot of that spilled over from Spanish into the English language. And some of it just came into our language by other routes. But the most interesting thing about this is that any longish sort of word, let's say 3 syllables or more, that begins with A-L, we should suspect that it's from Arabic, because A-L or al in Arabic means the. And the phrase that we're all most familiar with is Al-Qaeda. I'm not sure what Qaeda means, but al means the. And so the speakers of Spanish on the peninsula, when they would hear these words, they would just take the whole word into their language by imitation, because they didn't speak Arabic. They were the peninsular people. So they would hear something like al-kartuf, which was the Arabic word for the artichoke. But they heard it as all one, al-kartuf. And that's where the Spanish word alcachofa came from. And we've done the same thing in our language. It's just a phenomenon that occurs in any language. An example I can give you from Spanish that's not related to Arabic is we have this word a lariat, which is the rope for like roping cattle or something like that, a lariat.
Yeah.
And it from the Spanish, two words, la riata.
Oh.
Cowboys didn't hear it as two words. They heard la riata, and they shortened it to lariat. They anglicized it. They made it sound like an American word, calling it a lariat. So this is what happened with the Arabic words coming into Spanish and coming into English. But there's also so many words. Well, just to give you a couple more examples of those AL words, algebra is one, and alfalfa is another one, and algorithm, mathematical terms are really a lot of mathematical, a lot of scientific terms, but then so many terms for food as well. Who would think that our words for spinach and candy and sugar and cotton, lemon, orange, these things all came from Arabic.
Most people have no clue what the origin of all these different words come from.
Yes. You know, it's so easy to find, though. I love the big fat dictionaries because they always tell you, and now online dictionaries don't unless you're specifically looking into word derivations. But a big fat American Heritage Dictionary will tell you what the origin of the word is. And that's fascinating, and I love writing about word origins, too.
Oh, I bet.
One of my favorite topics, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Only if we had more time, we would be diving into that, too. You're such a wealth of information. You know, Susanna, where can people connect with you and be part of your community?
Oh, I would love for them to. Well, you know, they can connect with me on Facebook, Susanna Janssen. It's Susanna with two N's and Janssen with two S's. And they can also connect with me on my website, which is susannajanssen.com. And yes, I would love to hear from people, build my community, and have people read my blog and read more of my recent things that haven't been published yet. And my book is available on my website, of course, but on Amazon, too, and in many bookstores.
Yeah, and all the great retailers. Well, you know what? Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Marianne. It's been a pleasure to be with you and your listeners.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.